As Barry said, we are in the fourth week of a series of sermons we're calling Called Out. And this is a group of sermons focusing on the lives of the men who were called out by God and became the patriarchs of the Jewish nation. And this list of Israel's patriarchs is a very specific list, just 3 men in the list. The first one, and easily the best known of the patriarchs, is Abraham, who was the father of the Jewish nation. And the second patriarch is Abraham's son, Isaac. And the third and final patriarch is Isaac's son, Jacob. And the stories of the lives of these men are all found in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. And Genesis is a book that we believe Moses, who's another important Jewish leader, the book of Genesis is a book that we believe Moses initially wrote to tell the 1 million or so Jews that he had just led out of slavery in Egypt. He wrote this book for them so that he could tell them some very important things, the truth about some very important things. Things like how the world came to be in the first place, and how the Jewish people, of all people, came to have a special relationship with God. And over the last 3 weeks, we've been looking at some of what Moses tells us about Abraham and Abraham's special relationship with God. And what we've seen is that Abraham was called out by God. He was called to leave his homeland and to travel to a distant, faraway land that was completely different than anything he'd ever known before. And what we've discovered is that even though Abraham's life was filled with difficulties and disappointments, he obeyed God's call, and he fully believed all the while that God was leading him into a land of blessing. And this week, we are still in the middle of what Moses wanted us to know about Abraham. But surprisingly, Moses takes a big turn in his story, and he tells us about some events in Abraham's life that you wouldn't necessarily find in a book that is telling you about a nation's founding father. The truth is that Moses takes us the turn, and it's in, let me just tell you, it's in Genesis chapter 16, and so this is a great time for everybody to just grab a Bible or look at the app. If you have a house Bible, it's on page 13. It's Genesis 16. And what we find in Genesis 16 is that Moses takes this crazy turn, and he introduces us to a man named Ishmael. And Ishmael's very existence is going to make us wonder a little bit about our hero Abraham. But as we soon will see, God had a number of really good reasons for making certain that Moses told us about Ishmael, even if knowing about Ishmael makes us scratch our heads a little bit about Abraham. And these good reasons are really important. And probably the primary good reason is that God is going to tell us some important truths about himself through this story. He's going to reveal some things about himself that we need to know. And through this story, God is also going to speak to us and tell us important truths about our own lives and our own destiny. So here we go. We ready? We're in verse 1 of chapter 16. Now Sarai, and can I just stop a minute and just tell you that in this part of the story, their names are Sarai and Abram. And in a little bit, they're going to be changed to Sarah and Abraham. And if I say Sarah when it says Sarai, and if I say Abraham when it says Abraham or whatever, can you just give me a break on that one? It's really kind of hard to keep that one straight sometimes. So it's the same people, and I'm just, it happens. So anyway, here we go. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him. Now, I cannot tell you how much of a huge tragedy this would have been for both Abraham and Sarah. In the ancient world, a woman's entire identity, the very purpose of her existence, was tied to bearing children. and an old, childless woman represented a wasted, meaningless life. Plus, it was assumed in the ancient world that the reason that a woman was barren, as they said, was because there was something morally wrong with her, and that the gods, or God, they were punishing her with barrenness because of something about her that was just wrong. And the fact that Abraham was still even married to Sarah at this point in their life, as odd as this is going to sound to you, the fact that he was still even married to her was an indication of his love for her. You see, Abraham, like all men in the ancient world, they wanted heirs with an H. I know my name is Ayers, but they wanted heirs. They wanted children, preferably sons, of course, but Abraham would have been perfectly within his rights to have divorced Sarah a long time ago, because the way the system worked back then was if a woman hadn't had children within the first 7 years of marriage, that was a good enough reason to be rid of her and to marry somebody else. And we meet them in old age, and Abraham has not divorced her, and he's not taken another wife, and the only reason that I can think of that he wouldn't have done this is because he actually loved her. But verse 1 ends this way, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, the Lord, see this? The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. Now, I know that this probably strikes some of you as out of bounds. We don't do this today, but I just have to say that Hagar was Sarah's property. And everyone then believed that part of the role of being Sarah's personal handmaiden was to bear children for her if she needed some more children. This is just a given. So Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. Now, just one quick note. Hagar would not have been a full-on wife. This is not the case. She is still a slave. Okay? She's still a slave. It says, this happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. Now, this point in the story would have been the first time that any ancient reader would have raised their eyebrows, and they'd have gone, what? Who does this Hagar think she is treating Sarah this way? Goes on to say, then Sarai said to Abraham, this is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. And Abram replied, look, she is your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. And the angel said to her, Hagar, Sarai's servant, where have you come from? And where are you going? Well, I'm running away from my mistress Sarai, she replied. And the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. And then he added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. And the angel also said, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. Now, it's important to keep in mind who this angel was speaking to. He's speaking to Hagar, who is a young Egyptian slave girl. And a young Egyptian slave girl was possibly the last person on earth that the first people to read the book of Genesis would have thought that God was ever listening to. Follow me on this. Remember, this is a story about Sarah, who's the mother of the Jewish nation. Okay? And it's written originally to Jews who've just come out of very harsh slavery in Egypt. And it's a story about a Jewish woman being harsh to an Egyptian who's a slave to her. Now, can you see the irony in all of this? There is no possible way that the first readers of this would have had any sympathy for Hagar because they had just come out of harsh slavery under an Egyptian just like her. But the angel goes on and says, this son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey, and he will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. Now, when we read that Hagar's son would be like a wild donkey, we immediately going to think about donkeys the way we think about donkeys. And we don't generally use the term donkey when we call somebody that form of animal, but I just have to say that when we call somebody a donkey, it's not a compliment. But in the ancient mind, a donkey wasn't anything like what we think of when we call somebody a donkey. Actually, they held donkeys in really high regard. It was very common for groups of family to pool their money to buy one donkey because they were so valuable. And they're powerful animals, and they were really useful. And a wild donkey was a free donkey. It was an animal that no one could master. Hagar was a slave, and she'd been forced to be passive and compliant all of her life. But her son was going to be a free man who could openly resist and stand up for himself. And God's words told Hagar that Ishmael would be his own master. And for Hagar, this was something unimaginable. My son, a free man who can determine his own destiny? What a surprise that would have been to her. And something else that would have been a surprise, at least to the original readers of this story, that the primary characters that we're talking about at all are women. I have to say that if you read ancient stories about national heroes, you will never find women talked about very much in them. And yet here we have two women, and even more surprisingly is that both women would have had no value in the ancient world. An old, childless woman, worthless. A young Egyptian slave girl, meaningless. And yet, lo and behold, God was not only paying attention to them, but he was clearly watching out, in particular for the one person in the story that no one would have ever thought deserved a single moment of concern from God, Hagar, a young Egyptian slave girl. And as I said, God's promise to this girl was almost unimaginable. Her son would be a free man, and he'd be the father of more descendants than could be counted. And beyond that, something else, even more surprising, is that God, in this moment, allows Hagar to do something that I am unaware that he allows anybody else in the Bible to do, and that is to call him by their own chosen nickname. Look at verse 13. It says, thereafter Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God, the one who sees me. Or, have I truly seen the one who sees me? She gave God the name El Roy, which means, you are the God who sees me. And in naming God, this seemingly worthless slave girl reminds us of a great truth, that no matter what the circumstances of our life may be, whatever they may look like, God is present. He is watching, and he's waiting to care for us. He sees us. Just think for a minute with me about Hagar's circumstances. From what we can tell, Hagar is more than likely a 13-year-old girl, 8th grader, okay? And she'd been given to Sarah as a gift. She'd been taken from her home and dragged with these people to a faraway land, far away from Egypt, by people that spoke a different language than she did. And she'd been forced to give her body to an elderly man. And now she's pregnant, afflicted, homeless, and running for her life. And from all appearances, it would look like God wasn't paying any attention to her at all. And yet God sent an angel to find her in the wilderness and then settle her down and deliver her a great promise and to let her know that God cared for her more than she could imagine. Now, certainly this angel was calling her to something difficult. Go back and submit to Sarah's harsh authority. But it's clear that Hagar believed God. She trusted him and obeyed him. Verse 15 tells us this. So Hagar gave Abram a son, and Abram named him Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. Now we know about Ishmael's birth. But we don't meet him again in any major way until 14 years later in chapter 21. And the truth is that a whole bunch of things happen in Abraham's life in the next verses between chapter 16 and chapter 21. In chapter 17, Abraham gets his name changed from Abram to Abraham. And also circumcision is instituted by God as the sign that Abraham and his family are in a special relationship with God. And we do read there that Ishmael, who was 13 at the time, was circumcised along with everybody else in the family. And then in chapter 18, God and Abraham have this back and forth discussion about the fact that God has told him that he's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. That's an interesting story. But in chapter 19, God goes ahead and destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in chapter 20, Abraham moves to a new town, but for some reason he oddly tells everybody in the new town that his wife is his sister. He's thinking that his wife, who's like 80 years old, is so beautiful that people will kill him to get her from him if they know he's his wife, so that he says, oh, she's my sister. And can I just tell you, that one doesn't end very well. And then we get to chapter 21. And like chapter 21 is the greatest miracle in Abraham's life. And what happens is this. Sarah, who is now 90, gets pregnant and delivers a son who is named Isaac. And it's during a major celebration connected to the miracle birth of Isaac that we again meet Ishmael. If you'll turn over to page 17 in the House Bible to chapter 21, we'll start in verse 8. This is when Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned. Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. Now, Isaac is about 2, maybe 3, when they're going to wean him. Weaning parties were a big deal. I cannot ever remember getting an invitation to a weaning party, but in their day, they weaned them later. And they celebrated the weaning because, did you know that 1 of 4 children died before they were weaned in the ancient world? And when a child was weaned, they could celebrate the fact that they're probably going to live. So they'd have a big old party. It's just huge. The word is actually huge occasion. Okay, so here we go. But look in verse 9. It says, but Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant making fun of her son Isaac. And surprisingly, verse 9 contains some of the most confusing Hebrew in all of Genesis. First off, that sentence there, it says, Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant making fun of her son Isaac. That phrase, of her son Isaac, it's not in most ancient Hebrew texts. Okay, it's not there. So what it actually says in most of the ancient Hebrew texts is Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of her Egyptian slave, making fun. It just stops there, okay? Now, the word that gives us making fun is sahak. It's a Hebrew word, sahak, and boy, does it have a lot of meanings. It can mean everything from poking fun to playing roughly to doing gymnastics. to fondling someone. Okay? And it's used in all those ways in the Bible. Now, what Sarah saw Ishmael doing could have been everything from simply being goofy to laughing at little Isaac to stealing the limelight at Isaac's party by doing backflips to something far more sinister. We can't be 100% certain what it means. But whatever it was, it enraged Sarah. She says, she turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son. He is not going to share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it." This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son. But God told Abraham, "Do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too." So Abraham got up early the next morning and prepared food and a container of water and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, Hagar is once again, with the added responsibility of a teenage boy, she is once again just like we saw her earlier. She is alone, she's rejected, she's homeless. And can I tell you, a single woman out in the wilderness at that time in the world would have been in great danger. And verse 15 says, "And when the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. And she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. 'I don't want to watch the boy die,' she said, and she burst into tears. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, 'Hagar, what is wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants.' And then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water, and she quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up in the wilderness, and he became a skillful archer. And he settled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt." And other than learning in a brief genealogy later in the book that Ishmael had 12 sons, that's all we know about him. Now, I do want to say that there is this thought that he was the father of today's Arabs. And can I just tell you that is absolutely not true. If you want to know more about that, ask me. It is not true. But it's interesting. Did you notice that Ishmael in these stories never says a single word? And he only does one, he acts out one time, and the Hebrew is so vague, we don't even know what he was doing. And yet, here is his story in the Bible. Or maybe I should say the story of his mother and Ishmael are in the Bible. And I think their combined stories tell us that the last people you'd think are worthy of God's attention are right at the very center of God's heart and his care and his love. Who would have ever imagined that Hagar and Ishmael had a destiny that was freedom and a family and a relationship with the God of the universe? This is why I believe that God made certain that Moses put Hagar and Ishmael's story in Genesis. God wanted us to know that no matter who you are, or what place in the your place in the world may be, or whether your circumstances are good or bad, God is present. He is watching and caring for you. God sees you. And even though things today may seem difficult and hopeless, you may feel unworthy or marginalized, in this moment, God has a special call on your life. And his desire is to be with you and to bless you in surprising ways as he leads you into your destiny. This is why we have this story, to tell you this truth about God's heart towards you. Now, can I step back a minute and talk personally for a moment about these passages? This past Monday afternoon, while I was trying to work on this sermon, I was also carrying on 6 separate text conversations, all dealing with very different and very difficult circumstances in my life, and any one of them alone would have made you wonder, where is God? Is he watching and listening? I mean, we've had a sudden family health crisis sweep into our family. Oddly, I find myself in a huge neighborhood legal issue. And just to be honest with you, there have been some fairly unjust accusations against my character and the character of people that I know and love in the last week or so. And there's just 3 of the 6. And there I was, trying to put the final touches on a sermon that said the circumstances of your life don't say anything about God's presence with you. My big idea was your circumstances say nothing about whether God sees you or has a calling for you or a destiny for your life. And I had to take a step back and say, do I trust God in this moment under these circumstances? One thing was really certain to me at that moment was that if I am unsure about whether I believe that my circumstances don't say anything about God's presence with me, then I didn't have any right to preach this sermon to you. If I don't believe it, I'm just a liar. And to add to that, I have to be honest, lately I've been acutely aware of the fact that I'm in what can only be described as a vulnerable stage of life. I'm older in a younger world. The direction of my life is weaker, not stronger, because of my age and my place. I know this. And I could go on and on about that, but I just want to be honest with you and say that it's far easier at this stage of life in our culture for me to feel irrelevant and meaningless than to feel called and moving into some grand destiny. And all this is rolling around in my mind. So I was preparing for this sermon. A sermon that says your social class, your perceived place in the world, your wealth, your influence, your power have no bearing on whether God has an important call on your life. And I had to say, okay, Tim, do you really believe that God has a call on your life? Do you really believe that who you are right now, this 64-year-old man, is someone that is still worthy of God's interest? And do I believe that God can still make a difference in his kingdom that counts through somebody like me? Again, if I wasn't certain about those things, then I didn't have the right to preach this sermon. I was thinking about this and I was reminded again of why God gave us Hagar's story in the first place. He gave us this story, yes, to tell us about Hagar, but he also gave it to us to tell us the truth about his heart and to tell us how important any person that you ever see on the planet is to him, and that includes us, each one of us. And to remind us, to remind me how much he loves me. No matter where I find myself, he is our El Roy. And then I believe the Holy Spirit just overwhelmed me by bringing some of Jesus' words to my mind. These words, he said, I have told you many things so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. And then he said, I am leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart, and the peace I give is a gift that the world cannot give. So don't be troubled and afraid, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I fully believe that the Holy Spirit sought me out, and just like the angel messenger to Hagar, he came to give me a message that would settle me down and that would give me a great promise and let me know that God cared for me more than I could ever imagine. And so here I am preaching this sermon to you because I believe with all my heart that what I am telling you is the truth. That what Hagar and Ishmael's story tells us is the truth. I believe it with all my heart. I believe with all my heart that what Jesus has said to us is the truth. And as I think about my own life, as I look back over the years, even the story of my own life with all of its ups and its downs and its joys and its sorrows and its surprises and its terrible disappointments, my own story tells me that this is the truth, that no matter who you are and no matter what place in the world you may hold, and whether your circumstances are good or bad, God is present. He is watching and caring for you, and he sees you. And even though things today may seem difficult and hopeless, and you may feel unworthy or marginalized, in this moment, God has a special call in your life. And his desire is to be with you and to bless you in surprising ways and lead you into a destiny. This is why we have Hagar and Ishmael's story, to tell us that God loves us. Would you pray with me? Would you pray? Father, I am thankful for your story of your pursuit of Hagar. It is a story that says you will go to any lengths. You will do whatever it takes to find us and to tell us that you love us. Father, I thank you that this part of your word to us says that no matter what our circumstances may seem to say, your love and your call on us is overwhelming. Thank you that you value us as your children and that you give us the privilege of representing your love in the world. I pray this in Jesus' name.